our final storyteller coming to the stage. When I asked her, what resolution have you given up on already, she said making sure that the last thing she puts in her mouth before bed is not alcohol. Welcome to the stage, Weedman! There's one name left. Glenn Sheffer. Yes, Glenn. Okay, number one.
So when I was first dating Jeff, the thing that I was really attracted to was the fact that he had a kid. And it was a different time for me. Anyway, but I was really attracted to that, and I loved the fact that he had a family. He was a single dad, and when I'd go over to his house, we would eat dinner, and he would sit at the table. And I thought that was so charming at the time because I never did. I was like, oh my God, we're gonna sit at the table again tonight, and it was so. I thought it seemed so like a little family, and and that's definitely what I wanted to be a part of. I was just been divorced, and this is like 15 years ago, and so I that was a big selling point for me. That and the fact that he was a widower. And I don't know, I wasn't like, it wasn't like a fetish or something. I wasn't like, how'd she die? I wasn't like, but it just seemed like the idea that his arms, the arms that would hold me, are the ones that had held her, and she'd been sick for a couple of years, and he had been there for her, and I thought that was so amazing. And but then it also became this thing where it was very hard. It was this part of their life, like him and his son Zach, that was very much off limits. Like there was a lot of shutting of the doors and a lot of of things that happened. I mean, not just on Mother's Day. I wasn't like a monster. I knew I wasn't like, hey, it's Mother's Day. What about just like a card for the person who hangs out with you? Like I understood that it needed to be their time, But they would. There was a lot of when they would talk about her, or when one of her friends would come over, the wife who had died, Rachel. They were all they were just sort of separately. They were very separate about it. And I wanted so much to be in. I hated being pushed out. I was adopted too. I was like, I've already been pushed out. Like I can't be. And so that made it harder for me, I thought at the time. And so there's that. Okay, so I was definitely like, oh God, I wish these people would let me in some way. And it wasn't happening. So then I was going through this time period where I wasn't working, and much like the last never. Anyway, so I decided that I was going to volunteer, as one does, and I also was doing it because I volunteered once time before, and I wrote a play about it, and it had gone really well, and so I thought it'd be a way to sort of if you can't travel or do anything, or volunteer, for God's sake. So I went and I was looking at the volunteer thing, and I found hospice as an option. And I immediately was drawn to that, also because of the fact that that had been something that, all right, so I mean, she was in hospice, Rachel had been in hospice, and I thought it would be this way that I would be able to understand what they were, when they were talking about things like, the death rattle or whatever, I could be like, oh yeah, I know it, and just a way to. So I go do it, and I decide, I go through the training, and the training is it's about 4 weeks of just death anxiety for me the whole time, because I talk about all the different ways you die, and it's really specific, which, as it should be. I wasn't like, keep it general, but I got the point of it. But it was a lot of sort of talk about how the body shuts down and all that kind of stuff, and I spent a lot of time trying to regulate my breathing and get through it. But not get through it, I loved it too, but you know how that kind of stuff is. Death, it's so awful, yet so mesmerizing, so riveting. And so I sort of going through all that kind of stuff, and they, and I also learned about, during the training, I learned about listening, and they were at one point the woman who was running was like, well, does anybody know how to be a good listener? Or, I don't think, she didn't actually say that. She said something about she talked about how if you're a listener, which is if you're a good listener, and someone's telling a story like, oh, I grew up in Nebraska, what do you say? And I was like, oh, I know this, because I can talk, I know people. And I go, what you say is that oh my God, my mom grew up in Nebraska. Like, I know Nebraska, I go there every summer. And she was like, it's wrong. No, what you do is, they're dying. They don't want to get to know you right now. They're not looking to, get some more people to chat with. You ask them, it's you keep it on them. It's just like, so you were in Nebraska. And I remember at the time, the idea of that's what you do. You continue to keep the focus and just ask questions. You don't make it about you. I was like, oh my God, that changes everything. That was very life changing at the time. Never even considered it. I was like, that's what therapists do. I get it now. So I learned that. That was and I go to my first. I get assigned my first woman to go see. On the way there, she dies. So I quit. It was fucked. I'm just kidding. I the next one I had was this woman, Lucy. And Lucy was, she was dying. And she was visiting, well, she wasn't visiting, she was here with her husband because her daughter had brought her to LA so she could die near her family. So she, I was going to stay with Lucy while her husband would go try to find a golf course to do a little golf, so give him a little break. And I went in and I was super nervous. And they taught us during the training that you should do things like you could paint their nails, and or watch TV with them for 4 hours or something. So I was like, oh, so I brought my thing, I was going to do her nails, and so I brought some of the stuff that would make that happen. I think that's clear. So I was doing her nails, and she was asking me questions about my family and about where I was from, and she was like, so tell me how many brothers and sisters. And when I was like, she's asking me, like, are you trying to trap me here or something? Like, you started it. I don't know if I'm like, and but I was telling her because it seemed she seemed to earnestly want to know. So I started telling about how, like, oh yeah, I'm adopted. I never really felt, it wasn't like an adoption where my mother wasn't like, oh, and I'll never forget the moment that it was always sort of like, I had two older sisters who weren't adopted. When I asked my mom about it, she was like, why she chose to adopt another child. She was always very like, well, we had so many girl clothes, so I just thought, might as well get another little girl. And I was like, Goodwill didn't do pickups then or something? Like, it was just easier, just like, let's get a little girl, Sid. So they, so it was very, and I'd never really, it'd been hard for me to feel a part of things. Even when I was always a guest with people's families. I never felt like I had my tribe or I had my people. I was always sort of on the outside watching it, and how that, and I'm telling her all that. And at one point, and after I told about the adoption thing, she was like, "Are you bitter?" And I was like, "Oh, good question, Lucy." And I'm like, "No, I'm not bitter. You get used to it." All right, so we're chatting away, or I was chatting away. Lucy was quiet, and her husband comes home, and right as he walks in, Lucy had just gotten done with her nails, and she looks at him, and she was like, "Oh," and then she drug him across she had this white blanket, and her husband was like, "Oh, we just got that," and across the blanket, and I was like, "God, Lucy!" I didn't get mad. I wasn't like, but I was like, "Sorry about that," and I remember, anyway, so that happened, and then he was like, "Maybe next time don't do her nails, don't do something, she can't control it," and I was like, God, they fucking told me that during the training to do the nails. They didn't think it through, because you're right, that's, so that was, and then I felt like I kind of fucked that up a little bit, with, whatever, it was my first time, and then Lucy does what, you should do in hospice, so, you don't have to, I mean, you don't, anyway, never mind, I was like, she did pass, they should know there's another option if they want, okay, so, I got assigned another woman right after that, and she's in a home. Like, she's not in her. Lucy was staying in her condo where her daughter had put her, and the woman in the home it was like a convalescent home, and I walked in. As soon as I walked in, it was and I felt bad at the time, and the smells are really intense as it is, but I was stronger than what I remember. I had never been there, but it was intense. And the woman I was staying was this woman who had been a big band singer in Chicago, like in the 50s. And she was she was, the song that she was famous for was I'm a Little Teacup, which was this, I don't know if you know that cut, but it's like I'm a little, well, it doesn't matter. It's not, it's a good song. But she was famous for that, and I knew the song, and I don't know, they told me a little bit about her. I had like a sheet about her, and on the sheet it said something about how she was pleasantly confused. I think it was they were talking about what she was, her diagnosis of her, or what she was like in person. They're like, she's there, but she's a little pleasantly confused. And I thought that was, I'm like, oh, me too. We're gonna get along great. And so I would go, and mostly we would just talk. And I loved her. She was very fun to talk to. And she was also, she would have these sort of, I guess, pleasantly confused. She was paranoid that she was constantly thinking that there was like this was it. Her thing was that there was a lesbian that was coming and stealing from her, and the lesbian wanted her to meet her at the bus stop after she stole from her, and she wanted something sexual from her. She knew it, and that was always, which I loved. That I was always like, I didn't steal from you, and so we would. I loved all of her, and I also had been taught this yes and thing too. In the training, they were like, remember, if a dying person says like, close the window, and there's not a window, you're not supposed to be like, there's no window there. Oh my God, like you're supposed to open the window, like go along with, which so what a life lesson. So I'm this. I don't remember her name. Let's call her Natalie because it was sort of like timely for her. So for the time period she was from. So Natalie is. I decide that I need to find an activity or something to do with her, and I called her. One of the things they talked about is talk to their family and find out about that. Maybe there's something like maybe they love The Price is Right, and you could. And you could watch that too. They're always like, watch TV with them. It's like, Jesus. So I called her son, and he told me that he had these recordings of her from when she was performing in the, I guess, what was that, 30s or something. So I got him to send me a couple tapes, and my plan was that I was going to go, play the tape for her. And they had talked about that in the training. They're like, yeah, that it was something you could, that it was that people like look at pictures, as we all do, of their past and such. So I go in there, and again, it was very hard to go to that place. It was not only the smells. There was also this one woman that was always like, hello, 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 like a parrot. But I was like, she's hello, hi, hi, hi. Like it would stress me out trying to. That element was very. So I bring the tape for her, and I'm telling everybody, the people who work at the home, about how I'm going to play this tape, and it's Lucy performing and being interviewed, and she'd been on the radio, and it's very sort of like that old time, you've been on the road now for how long? Well, I've been on the road for about 30 years now. Like it's very like it's wonderful, and so we got to, and all the people working there are really like, oh my God, I can't wait to hear it. And like Lucy, and they bring her out from her room into the common area, and everybody's like, oh, we're going to play this tape of when Natalie was performing, and they all gather around, and we put it on, and she hears her voice, and I see her, and normally she was a bit more in a fog, like a bit more sort of, like the lesbian's coming to get me in the bushes, and all of a sudden she went from being very fog to she hears her voice, and she's, and looks at me like, what is happening? And then she was like, I could tell that she recognized it, and then she started to sob, and she started just to seem so what? And it felt like not the crying I'm confused, I don't like going out to the mall, it wasn't that overstimulation or whatever. It was crying I get mad, what, that's not what I meant. It just seemed like this loss of, oh my God, it was awful. And she starts to cry, and everyone's like, whoa, and I'm like, sorry. And I turn it off, and I'm like, sorry about that. That was an awful idea. And then people are like, oh, that really upset her. And so I was like, God, Jesus, I can't do, anyways, that. And then I was apologizing to her, that I didn't realize, and she was really agitated after that, and I felt horrible. And also, I'm a volunteer. Maybe I should have fallen back on that. I'm a volunteer. I don't know what I'm doing. But instead, I was like, God, I should be. So and I told her I would come back, of course, and I would come back and see her, even though I was having a hard time with that place and the smells of that place. So I told her I was going to come back. She was like, that's okay. And she fired me, which was, I guess, at the time I was secretly happy because of the fact that I was having a hard time, in that with the smells, as I said. Well, it turned out that I was pregnant, and I didn't realize it. And I was smelling everything. I mean, I'd be, the whole anything. The smell of, I'm like, I smell meat. It's somewhere in that garbage can. Blah. It was disgusting. So for a moment, I was thinking that maybe I wasn't sure if I should have the baby, and then it just ended with and then I had an abortion. Good night. No. That would be a good ending though. No, it's much more like, I decided that I was going, I did want to have the baby, and I did, and I realized all this time that I've been wanting in this room. I wanted in so much, these places in this part of Jeff's life and his son's life. I wanted to be in a room I hadn't earned yet, and that I wasn't, instead of thinking I'm not allowed in there, it's like, no, I didn't, I don't have no reason to be in there. It's not yet. And well, hopefully, and then after I had my kid, of course, I was like, oh, now I get my own family, and I'm in. I get to be in. And of course, he went on to have sex with our babysitter, and everything kind of fell apart. But before that, there was a moment of like, oh, this is amazing. The end.